Today we're looking at the first part of the fifth lecture in the winter 1931 term. In the last lecture we saw that Christianity, seeing their God sacrifice himself, sacrifices the experience of God within man. Making their God only the divine person, they force an impossible equivocation and a resulting inflation, tending to deny the reality of the divine-human duality in humankind. This tends to lead to a repression and reactive possession by the image of the contrasexual, and an inability to experience the full range of ambivalence inherent in the psyche and in the world. Jung is offering a different structure to the Christian idea, one in which the understanding of Christ retains the dualism between the human being and God. Psychologically, the idea is this severs the participation or identification with the God image and puts the human qualities in a more acknowledged position. This acknowledged position is related to the Nestorian idea of the blood baptism, and in the next movement of the vision, the native man spills blood on the visioner's head and turns her white robe red. This, Jung says, is a reconnection with the instincts, the primitive impulses. Through this reconnection, one encounters an appalling fear, but a subsequent realization of the value of civilization. It's here worth connecting this with another one of Jung's more explicit treatments of Christianity, in his Psychotherapy and the Clergy, where he concludes in part that this separation from social connection, which he terms a sacred egoism, is curative in the treatment of inner conflict in neuroses. Through loneliness and encounter with the base instincts, the neurotic reemerges with peace amidst the frenetic social order. There is in this connection, too, recalling Durkheim, who said that God is society writ large, an obvious isomorphism between God and society, and this, we recall, is the insight of Tao, in which the outer images represent elements of one's unconscious, the place of divinity. But this discovery can only be maintained through the realization of the primitive as the real, namely that one is ultimately a helpless part of nature, and not even civilization can stand between an individual and death. The Christian tendency is to solve the confrontation with nature by shifting the inner scenery, as it were, according to the intellect or the feeling. This confrontation with the immovable facts of nature, against one's own supposed omnipotence, is the cause of many severe neuroses. Civilization can often keep the human being in a sort of dream from such realities. This is the so-called provisional life. I would offer that a confrontation with God and the experience of ecstasis, as had been defined in my commentary on Part 1 of Lecture 4 of this term, is just such a confrontation with nature, even if it is often called supernatural. It is a sort of ultimate confrontation with the real. It is here, in the Christian tendency to impose transcendent order on a natural experience, that we see a movement from the real to the provisional. This tension between immanent and transcendent appears in the next movement of the vision, in which the visioner is carried upwards in a spiral of blood. The structure of the spiral, Jung says, a movement upwards that returns to the same horizontal point, represents growth. Taken with the notion of the blood baptism, it indicates the idea that, quote, if you surrender to the terror of the blood, you will discover that it leads to development. Instead of leading down into hell, it leads upwards. In this movement upward, the visioner then sees the white face of God, the sun, and a pool of gold, ending up then in a great dark forest. Here, her idea, Jung says, of God has been very pale, white, and she's carried beyond this notion by the blood to a more concrete vision of God as the sun itself, and then to the most concrete image of God as gold, an element in the earth. The greatest value of all, Jung says, is God. The greatest value of life is the sun, and here we see the greatest value of the intellect is gold. This is what tends to happen when the confrontation with the real is made transcendental. There becomes an inner division between the transcendental, the unreachable divinity, and its real or earthly substitute. Let's then end with an extended quote. Jung says, quote, the fact is that the idea of God has really become very abstract and unreal. It does not work as an actual determinant. Yet there is always a highest value, a center of gravity which decides ultimately. So this woman, as long as she is unconscious that her God is in her safe, that is, gold, is a materialist and is really hindering herself from living. She is more or less sacrificing her life, ideals, to her money. Now here she discovers that her God is a pool of gold, and this is a mighty good thing, for now the thing becomes conscious. She knows that her fear of God is connected with money.